Okay, we are taking you live now to Washington, where Canadian officials are speaking after a meeting with Donald Trump's Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. So let's take a listen in.
Ambassador Greer, senior people from the Trade Representative's Office, from the Commerce Department. It was an opportunity for us to understand in a very concrete way the American process over the next few weeks, President Trump's America First trade policy, and the decisions that Secretary Lutnick and the President and Ambassador Greer will be considering over the next few weeks. Obviously, we reiterated the long-standing position of our government that the tariffs are unjustified, that we think it's much more constructive to build a strong North American economy by working together, by dealing with issues as important as China and other issues that frankly should be dealt with by economic partners working together, not in a context of applying tariffs to one another. So we agreed to maintain the dialogue. I speak to Secretary Lutnick in many cases a number of times a week. We exchange text messages. He seems to be working late at night and early in the morning. And we agreed to continue those conversations. Alors, juste pour répéter, on s'est engagé à la fin de continuer la conversation.
We committed at the end to continue the conversation, and I speak with Secretary Lutnick several times per week. We text message each other early in the morning, late in the day. He's constructive and cordial, and we will continue until the tariffs have been removed. And my colleague Champagne will have something to say. Thank you for being here. I think Minister Leblanc has well summarized today's meeting. Let's say that today's meeting was a good meeting. It was constructive with important discussions, I think, in the context we're living. We had the opportunity to remind our U.S. neighbors of the impacts of the tariffs on both sides of the border for businesses and families and industries that are affected by these. I think that there's a mutual understanding on both sides of the border. It can't be without impact or consequence. And it also allowed us to defend Canadian interests for the various industries that we were able to speak of today, and to commit, as Minister Leblanc said, in a dialogue. As we know, it's in a dialogue we can bring things forward. I think is crucial, and I think today's meeting was a good meeting. There will be others to advance the interests of Canada, and with Premier Ford and with my colleagues Leblanc and the Ambassador, I think today we took a step forward, obviously, in understanding how we can work together with our U.S. neighbors in order to make North America the most competitive in the world.
A fairly lengthy discussion, a long discussion, a constructive discussion with our American partners, a lot of people around the table. We were in a position to restate the fact that these tariffs are having an impact on both sides of the border, in communities, for workers, for families, and also to make sure that our friends understand that this is harmful on both sides of the border. We made sure that they understand that we're here to defend Canadian interests, that there's potential for a reset as well, where you have now a new Prime Minister that is going to be sworn in tomorrow, to make sure that we engage constructively, that we engage in respect, and that we make sure that we look at the opportunities for us to do more together. Because at the end of the day, this is about making North America more competitive, more prosperous, and more resilient. So we'll be happy to take your questions.
We'll move on to questions. One question and a follow-up.
Well, you just stated her name. You didn't let Katie.
Yeah.
I knew that was Katie Simpson. I've seen you on TV.
Yes.
Katie Simpson, CTV.
Yeah.
My question is, I don't know if this goes to Minister Champagne or Minister Leblanc. Does anything tangibly change as a result of this meeting?
Well, let me start, and I'm sure Dominic would say, a dialogue. an ongoing dialogue to make sure that we understand the impact on both sides of the border, that we make sure that we see that there is a different way forward that we can engage with to make sure that North America is more competitive. We talked about issues around economic security and national security. So I would say every time that we have the opportunity to come here in Washington and talk with the administration and the officials about our joint endeavor to make sure that North America is more competitive, that's a win for our country. But I'm happy to say if you want to add something.
Okay.
So nothing changes?
Well,
There's nothing changeable, nothing's coming off, nothing additional is coming on from Canada's side, there's nothing tangible in this moment?
well, I would say the fact that we're engaging is a tangible outcome. We've said that we're going to be continuing that discussion. We talked about the impact on both sides. I would say, I think on their side, they understand the impact that these tariffs are having. We talked about a number of issues around economic security and making sure that North America would be more competitive. And also talking about, kind of a reset. Like I said, we have a new prime minister that's going to be sworn in tomorrow. I think that we insisted that they may take that opportunity to engage with the new prime minister in a different way, with respect, and certainly looking at opportunities that we can work together and make sure that, we changed, in my view, a bit the channel about looking at opportunities and competitiveness in North America.
Judy Trinh, CTV News. Minister Champagne, you mentioned that you wanted to get a sense of the rules of engagement so you could win, so Canada could win. It is a trade war. Is it too optimistic to believe that you are going to get transparency in how the U.S. will want to engage when they also want to win and they also want to dominate us in terms of our sovereignty?
Well, we want to win, clearly. And I can tell you, when we know the rules of the game, we win. You just saw the hockey game recently. The thing is that what we came out today, we have a better understanding of the frame around the America First economic policy and trade policy they put together. That understanding, I think, is helpful. Obviously, those were private conversations, so we're not going to be standing here, Minister LeBlanc and I, with the ambassador to go into all the details of what we discussed. But I would say that we leave Washington, I think, better equipped in making sure that we can defend Canadian interests. You want to add anything?
Follow-up question. Cabinet shuffle tomorrow, as well as swearing in of our new prime minister. The Commerce Secretary has also been on the record saying that he wants to deal with a government that will be able to make more long-lasting permanent changes. We know that Mark Carney wasn't here today. What is going to happen in terms of this government? How are you going to get to a position of more permanence so that Secretary Lutnick, so the Trump administration can say, we want to negotiate with you because you're going to lead Canada in the next few years?
Well, they understand that we're the government. They understand the democratic process in Canada. There's also an understanding that there'll be a discussion, I would think, in the coming days between the Prime Minister-designate and the President of the United States. They understand that despite the fact that we may be in an electoral process in the coming weeks, that this is priority number one for Minister LeBlanc and I. We will still be ministers during that period, or at least we'll see tomorrow. But certainly...
That was a mistake.
No, there's a good chance. And we will work together to make sure that we will defend Canadian interests despite the fact that we might be in an election. But we will be there. This is priority number one, fighting for Canadians every single day. This is what we've been done from day one, and that's what we'll continue to do.
Minister LeBlanc, would you like to? I noticed that Minister Champagne is taking a lot of questions. Is he going to get an expanded role?
I was born at night, but it wasn't last night. So you're not going to have me talk about a cabinet swearing in. I know it's very exciting. It's probably 16 hours from now. Your colleagues, I'm sure, will be at Rideau Hall. I think they have to be there like at 9:30. The ceremony, I'm told, is at 11. So the good news is you'll have all those answers tomorrow morning. So you must be very excited about it. I certainly know we are. Azeb.
Oui, bonjour.
Bonjour. Azeb était à Moncton pour longtemps, là.
Oui, pendant 3 ans.
Ouais.
Azeb was in
Azeb
Moncton.
Georgis, Radio-Canada. Premièrement, on voulait savoir qui est l'interlocuteur
First,
du Canada. Comment ça s'est passé?
Who was speaking
la
for
réunion
Canada?
entre Doug
How
Ford
did the
et Howard
meeting go
Lutnick, parce qu'on a
with
beaucoup
Doug
entendu
Ford,
Howard
with
Lutnick sur les
Howard
médias américains,
Lutnick?
qui n'était pas
because we heard Mr. Lutnick on American media that he was not happy with what happened. How did it go today? If you allow me, Azeb. François Philippe and the ambassador could add also. This meeting, Mr. Lutnick accepted following a conversation with Mr. Ford earlier this week. I spoke to Premier Ford the same day, and Premier Ford said it would be great if I could come with him to this meeting. And then I spoke to Secretary Lutnick, and he was happy with this idea. As you know, the federal government is the one to negotiate international agreements. However, the provinces are important partners for the federal government. We have a good tradition in trade negotiations to work with the premiers. Premier Ford is the head of the federation, so he leads the group with the 10 other provinces and 3 territories. But this discussion was completely cordial between them. We all offered opinions. We were heard. We heard Secretary Lutnick's opinions, and we agreed at the end, Howard and I, that we would continue this conversation next week. It's only Thursday. We may speak even before next week. I'm very happy that we had a fairly informal exchange, but it's also the occasion to reiterate, as François Philippe said, that we do not agree at all with the tariffs of Mr. Trump's administration, and this was no surprise for the Secretary or the Ambassador, and we will continue to defend Canada's interests. A question on the border. Donald Trump continues to say it's the 51st state and that the economy should be integrated. Perhaps this is why they're trying to force the tariffs to make things difficult with the Canadian economy. Do you think this is what they're trying to do? Did Howard Lutnick bring up this aspect? François Philippe will say we did not discuss the integration of Canada into the U.S. We are a sovereign, independent, proud country. We should be an economic partner, and in terms of national security, we stand with the U.S. We always did. We want to still be that partner, but obviously, if they're applying tariffs, they're setting Canada against the U.S. The U.S. started this with Canada. It's not constructive. I shared an Acadian expression. It's not a race to the basement. There's no prize for the first one to get to the basement. The pressure from the Trump administration, well, we feel the economic pressure, and we're going to defend Canada's economic interests. The idea of a 51st state makes no sense, and we were very clear on that. We didn't discuss this kind of question in a business meeting with an American secretary. We're there to discuss economic issues. You say, obviously. What do you see more and more? And Minister Leblanc is completely right, is that today's meeting allowed us to be very clear that national security and economic security are related. We'll not go into the details, but we had very concrete examples. For example, we talked about Canadian aluminum that helps the American defense and aerospace, talking about how Canadian steel can help. You heard the president recently who wants to start building ships around the country, how we can be a part of that great vision and make North America more competitive. I was here with you during the inauguration when he was talking about the Golden Age. So that was the argument we were making with Dominic, the ambassador, and the ambassador. If you look at trade through the lens of national security, Canada is first choice. Canada was always there. Canada is there and will always be there. So yes, there's understanding, and that was our objective with Minister Leblanc, is to integrate our supply chains and integrate our chains, for example, in terms of manufacturing. in key technology sectors. So I think today, a session like this that lasted more than an hour, I think at least a good hour, that's good. Because honestly, when I was looking at the other side of the table, I saw people who said, for example,
on peut parler des semi-conducteurs, on peut...
the tech we have, like semiconductors and so on, very important for American defense around the world. There's this planet, but there's this economic reality that Canada and the U.S. are integrated economically in our supply chains for decades now. So if we're talking about national security, Canada is the partner of choice.
Hey there, probably not a familiar face, but Tim Collad's, I'm with the Report on Business at the Globe and Mail, so from the financial side of things. Was wondering, for lack of a better term, what the vibe was like in the room today. And the reason why I asked that is because, you know, to kind of set the table, Secretary Lutnick goes on TV this morning, uses very aggressive language, kind of kills the idea that there was this olive branch. How much of that was grandstanding versus kind of having a relatively normal diplomatic meeting, considering there were just so many people in the room? Did he repeat the kind of same language in the room, or was that actually much more civil?
I would say I've been Minister of Foreign Affairs before. I have had a number, like Dominic and the ambassador, a number of engagement with foreign leaders around the world. I would say this was a constructive discussion. We have our disagreements, but as long as you have dialogue, you're making progress. That's how I see it. Obviously, they understand our position. We understand their position, but there's a dialogue. The fact that we were able to be here today with the ambassador, with Minister LeBlanc, with Premier Ford, state our case, make sure that they understand a number of things, for us also to listen. I would say, you know, engagement and dialogue is certainly the way forward. So that's how I would characterize. But I don't know if, Dominic, you want to add to that?
That was an excellent answer.
And last question is, something that's starting kind of to drip out there is this idea that, you know, Canada should be more like Mexico. And all week I've been meeting with Republican leaders, and they keep saying, you know, like maybe you just need to tone it down a bit and, you know, let him feel like he should win. You know, what gives you the conviction that the strategy Canada's taken is the right one in terms of kind of being blunt and using economic leverage against the U.S.?
Well, I'll just say something and I'll turn over to Minister LeBlanc if he wants, but I think there's no alternative than standing up for Canadians, standing up for our workers, and standing up for our industry. I think if there's one thing that President Trump respects is strength, is frankness, is people who defend their own interests. That's what we came in this town for. And that's what we will continue to do. And I think meetings like the one we have today, and there'll be more, as Minister LeBlanc said, every time that you have engagement, dialogue, but also that you can voice your differences, I think it brings the discussion forward. So I would say if I put that, we do it our own Canadian way. The Prime Minister designate also has been outspoken about that. We'll be talking about the economy. We're going to be talking with respect to each other. We're going to be talking about competitiveness and the important role that Canada plays, not only in North America, but in the world economy.
Thank you.
I think we've got time for 2 more reports.
Kelly Malone, the Canadian Press. So Trump's team has been on the news talking about how Canada doesn't really have a prime minister. Do you get any indication that they'll be willing to work with Mark Carney after tomorrow? Or are you expecting more fulsome conversations won't happen until after the Canadian election?
Well, I can, you know, I am fairly confident that they will want to be on our side. We are certainly willing to engage with the President of the United States. You know, Mr. Carney will be sworn in tomorrow as the Prime Minister of Canada. And I think it is a good thing that these two leaders will be able to talk. I think today was a good meeting, obviously, to exchange views. And I think there's a desire, I would say certainly on our side, but probably on both sides, to have the two leaders talk to each other. They've met each other before, that I can say, because having spoken to Mr. Carney, they have in the past have had interactions, or they have met. And you know, Mr. Carney brings an outstanding level of experience and resume, understands the world, understands markets, understands the economy. And I think in that sense, this is kind of the kind of discourse that I would think that the president would be wanting to engage with someone who will talk about the economy, how we can be competitive, and how Canada can be a partner for growth in North America.
Anything
you want to?
Well, I want to be very pleasant here, but I don't accept the premise of the question. Canada always has a prime minister. Canada has a prime minister today. Tomorrow, Canada will have a new prime minister. But there's always a prime minister in office. The government retains the authorities, for example, to impose counter tariffs. Even during an election period, the government will be in a position to respond if we decide to respond. So I think we have to be careful. And in my casual conversations with Howard Lutnick or even Secretary Bessent, they would ask me, like, tell me, like, this process, like what happens over the next few weeks. So there's no confusion on their part in terms of how Canadian democracy will unfold. Canada will always have a government that is in a position to exercise its authority, and it's no different today. And tomorrow it'll be a different government that will be exercising that same authority and defending Canadian interests.
I will clarify, Trump's team said it, not me.
No.
So Jameson Greer was working with Bob Lighthizer in the negotiations of CUSMA in the first Trump administration. So what did he say to you about the trade pact's future? And can you really have any true conversations about CUSMA with these tariffs hanging over Canada that change daily?
So maybe the ambassador would want to add something because she's worked with Ambassador Greer before. We met him when we came down a few weeks ago and had a meeting at the White House. I thought he was very thoughtful. He was very constructive. He clearly has a lot of experience in these issues. We agreed with him and Secretary Lutnick that the details of the conversation are most effective when they're kept private. But we also agreed to continue the conversation. And I think that the conversations will benefit from his experience and his expertise in this area. And I do agree with the idea that if and when there is a discussion to review a free trade agreement, it's not particularly helpful if there are a series of tariffs applied to the Canadian economy, counter tariffs, which are no surprise to anyone. We've been saying that for many weeks, would be the position of the Government of Canada. If we think that the best way to have an effective conversation is to go back to respecting the free trade agreement that Mr. Trump negotiated in his first term, and if they want to have a structured, constructive discussion about elements of that agreement that they want to improve, of course, the Government of Canada will be ready to have those conversations. Kirsten, did you want to add something?
I think the only thing that I would add to that is that he is, as the minister says, a very experienced trade expert and negotiator. And I think that the administration's, if you look at their America First trade policy, it has many elements to it. And he is the main quarterback of those series of studies that are happening. I think that that is primarily what they're looking at now to get to the deadline that the president has set for coming out with the recommendations from all of those various studies. And he, he said as much to us about that today. And then the review of the USMCA or the CUSMA, it comes in 2026. So there is a timing issue here that I think the administration is looking at, and April 2nd is certainly the next date that they're focusing on.
Time for one more question and follow.
Reggie Cicchini, Global News. You say you're taking concrete steps to have conversations with the Trump administration. Is it helpful to have provincial leaders taking such a vocal and visual role in these conversations, as well, zeroing in on the threat for potential Ontario tariffs, paused or not right now, on energy exports? I mean, it caused friction with the White House, but obviously it also led to a face-to-face. So is it helpful to have provincial counterparts taking part in this as well?
So I'm also the Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs. I talk to premiers across the country quite regularly. Obviously, Premier Ford, in his capacity as chair of the Council of the Federation, has a leadership role in that context as well. I speak to Premier Smith. I speak to Premier Moe. I obviously want to speak to the Premier of New Brunswick often. the Premier Legault. These are ongoing conversations. We believe that the country is stronger when the provinces work together and with the Government of Canada. We've been very grateful for the unity that Canadians have shown, but that's also reflected by all the orders of government in these conversations. We wouldn't presume to tell Premier Ford how to manage issues within the jurisdiction of the Government of Ontario. In our federation, the provinces are sovereign in their own jurisdiction. The Government of Canada, however, is responsible for negotiating international treaties and trade agreements. But the tradition is that the provinces are consulted and are involved with the Government of Canada in ensuring that we're representing the national interest. So that was part of the conversation today, which I thought was quite constructive.
I'll give my follow to Mr. Winkles.
Oh, not to Josh. Oh, no.
Josh.
No, sorry. Wow, that's not.
We really snuck in there.
That's really gross. You kept telling everybody to go ahead of you, Josh.
I know. Thank you for this. Can I ask you a couple things on, number one, the president has been talking a lot about dairy. Is Canada open to changes to that system in the context of a broader trade negotiation? And secondly, a lot of the talks in the last week has been focused on Premier Ford's export tariff. There's been talk also of other measures the federal government could take on export controls or tariffs. Are those still on the table, in particular, on oil or potash?
There's like 5 questions, I think.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. Again, provinces within their own jurisdiction will come to the decisions that they do. We have been encouraged by so many provincial and territorial governments looking at ways, in some cases non-tariff measures, that will impress upon the American administration that this is not a constructive way to build a strong North American economy. So the Premier of Nova Scotia decides to increase the tolls on American trucks on a part of the Trans-Canada Highway between New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. Every province has come up with ideas that they think will show Americans that this is not a constructive way to continue. With respect to dairy, we've been clear from the beginning that there is no discussion about reopening the agreement that was reached in the CUSMA context 8 years ago now on dairy. We did not discuss that today. We've been clear publicly and in private that that's not on the table, and we don't intend to have that conversation. Is it fair to say all countermeasures right now are paused as these talks continue? So I'm sorry, in your 5 or 6 questions, Josh, you did ask about export taxes. Again, or controls. Export controls, export permits would be another. We've said all these options remain on the table. Our hope is we don't get to the point that we're examining these sort of extraordinary steps. We've been clear that if on April 2nd we haven't arrived at a circumstance where these tariffs are lifted, Canada would take further retaliatory measures on that sort of total of $155 billion of imports into Canada, on which we would apply a 25% tariff. That's not a surprise. I've discussed that with Secretary Lutnick. So we continue to believe the best scenario is to remove these tariffs and remove all of these ripostes, these retaliatory measures. But if we get to a circumstance where it's in the interest of the Canadian economy to continue to impress upon the Americans that this is not a constructive way to build a prosperous economy on both sides of the border, it won't surprise anyone that we'll put those in place. And all the options remain on the table as we go forward. But our hope is that we can get to a position where we don't get to a circumstance where we have to use them, but they remain on the table.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, today.
Merci.
Thank you very much. Merci.
Merci.
Safe travels. Nice to see you, Jim.